Hello everyone. Today I will be featuring the Iron Duke, the Tier 5 Royal Navy battleship, and the matchmaking is of course Tier 5 to 6, which is pretty much the most common matchmaking you will face. Quite often you will also end up against Tier 7s, very rarely you'll end up against Tier 4s, but in general Tier 5 to Tier 6 is kind of the matchmaking that you tend to face the most. In the past, it used to be, like a couple of months ago, it used to be a ton of T7s, but Wargaming has made some efforts to make T5 a bit more enjoyable so that it's not as much T7 spam as it used to be. Anyway, the Iron Duke. Well, you can see by just looking at the way the ship looks and the turret setups, the ship I'll obviously will be comparing this ship to the most is the New York, because they got the same 10 guns, very similar turret setup, 5x2 guns and so forth. Health pool wise, well, the first one we'll see is the Iron Duke loses to the New York, but it's not really that significant. We're only talking a very small difference of like 2k health or so. The torpedo belt is pretty much identical to both of them, so there's not really big differences here. The speed, actually the Iron Duke is faster. The New York does 21 knots when fully upgraded. The Iron Duke does 22.5. Now it might not sound like a lot, but when they are so very slow, even a small increase feels much more comfortable. Both are very slow though, and of course when you face faster, higher tier ships, both are liabilities in that sense. What is a major significant difference is the way the armor on these ships work. The Iron Duke is simply much tankier than the New York is. Yes, the New York might win by 2k health, but in terms of tankiness, the Iron Duke is far superior. Not only does it have better armor values, unlike the New York, which is very vulnerable to eating random pens from pretty much every angle besides if they hit exactly on the belt, the Iron Duke has a lot more armor. In fact, no, it doesn't just have the belt armor, but above it on the broadside it has additional, I think something like 200mm armor, which makes those random pens on the higher part of the broadside quite rare. It also, the belt armor also extends very far toward the nose, in fact going way past the front turrets, almost all the way to the nose. So the only way you really eat overmatch pens is if they hit the very tip of your nose of the ship, the very tip of your bow. And if you angle even the slightest, then you will be getting that extended belt towards the enemy, and you will be tanking shells even against higher tier battleships. So that of course greatly enhances the tankiness of this ship. Another thing is Citadel. Whereas the New York Citadel does come above the waterline, the Iron Duke Citadel sits exactly at the waterline. It's not below the waterline like many Royal Navy battleships, but it sits exactly at the waterline, and it has a turtle back on top of it. So what this all of course leads to is that the Iron Duke beats the New York heavily in tankiness, and especially when you're up tiered, which happens extremely often at tier 5 as I mentioned, the Iron Duke performs much better thanks to all this additional armor, which really helps its tankiness. And the guns though, well, the guns are, the New York has 356mm guns, the Iron Duke has 343. So it's a small downgrade. The AP Citadel damage goes from 10.3k on the New York to around to 9.9k on the Iron Duke. So a small, not that big of a downgrade. Penetration wise, I haven't really noticed much of a difference at all. The guns on the Iron Duke feel quite comfortable for the tier. Big difference is of course that the New York has a pretty abysmal reload of 34.3 seconds, whereas the Iron Duke has the 30-second reload. So we're trading off a very small amount of alpha for basically more than 10% reload speed, which is a very beneficial trade to the Iron Duke. Secondaries go heavily once again in the favor of the Iron Duke. The New York, I think it has 6 secondaries, that's pretty much it. 6 4km range secondaries, and that's pretty much all it has, like 6 in total, not just on one side. So the secondary armament on that one is a joke, whereas the Iron Duke actually has 20, I think, and of those 12 are 152mm HE firing secondaries. You can see near the bow, you can see the indentation where the secondaries pop out below the front two turrets. On the sides you can see those 152mm guns. They have 4.7 km range, and what's impressive about those guns is while the reload is slow at 8.6 seconds, they actually have a 12% fire chance. So if you do end up in brawls, you tend to set a lot of additional fires with your secondaries, simply because of how high the base fire chance on those are. So that, once again, of course, kind of sounding like a broken record here, but that goes in the favor of the Iron Duke, quite significantly in fact. The AA, pretty even. I mean, the Iron Duke has very slightly better long-range anti-air. I think it has a fair amount longer anti-air, fairly longer anti-air, and but it doesn't have as much mid-range AA as the New York does. I would say the Iron Duke wins this comparison as well, but honestly neither of these ships are going to be shooting down any planes unless they literally fight right on top of you, so it's not really that big of a deal to compare them. You see I'm being dropped here, or I'm not sure if he's dropping me or someone next to me, but at 1.7 km range, and while focus firing these planes I shoot down one plane. They dropped within 0.7 km. I'm still not shooting down any additional planes, and this is with fully intact AA. I haven't really taken any damage. So yeah, the AA isn't gonna impress anyone. Even if beating the New York doesn't mean that it's actually competitive against anything. What else do we have besides concealment, of course? Concealment, well, big surprise, Iron Duke is once again the victor by a quite significant margin. With just camo, without concealment expert, you have 14.5 concealment on the Iron Duke, whereas the New York sits at 15.5. This of course becomes more significant when you put a concealment expert captain on it, but it's still a pretty obvious win for the Iron Duke. Worth mentioning is that the Iron Duke, of course, can... Oh, see, that's what I talk about. That's the same tier ship, that's a Texas. And of course, Texas, like the New York, eats a lot of these high-hitting penetrations from pretty much every angle, whereas you are not nearly a victim to the same kind of stuff. Oh, and of course, one final thing. When you face higher tier ships, especially tier 7s, and they angle against you, the Iron Duke has a 40% chance of fire on its HE. So if higher tier battleships angle against you, you can punish them extremely heavily by what has become kind of a staple thing for the Royal Navy battleships, not cruisers, but what has become a staple thing for the Royal Navy battleships is this extremely high chance of setting fires, and that applies to the Iron Duke as well. So looking at all these stats, comparing them one by one and going through this, it's of course very hard not to simply see this as a vastly improved New York in pretty much every way. And yeah, it's hard to make the argument that it isn't simply just a better New York in every way. I've tried to see something where the New York, I would consider the New York a winner, but the New York is, in my opinion, a pretty mediocre ship. And this problem of it being very mediocre is further acerbated. How is it that pronounced? Sorry about that. I know the word, I can't remember the pronunciation. I hope you understand what I mean. It's further emphasized by the fact that you're constantly up-tiered, and being up-tiered is something that the New York doesn't deal with very well at all. So the Iron Duke, well, it deals with tier 5 a lot better than the New York does. Whereas playing New York is kind of frustrating, because, well, when you're up tiered, you're in for quite a struggle. Really, this guy, well, gonna end up hitting a torp simply because this Dunkirk decided to park in front of me and stop my speed. But, ow, well, there goes a lot of my health, and this game just got a lot harder. This game just got significantly harder because of that. So now we're down to very low health, and I'm facing a full HP Fuso. But I am gonna remain angled towards him, and of course, hopefully we can show some of the additional armor that we have to play with on this thing, and why it's more comfortable to play against especially higher tiers. Of course, against tier 5s, you kind of slaughter in this thing, I feel like, because the lower caliber guns but the faster reload means that less pen isn't as much of an issue when you face lower tiers, whereas of course the increased armor means that you're even tankier against them. So just a very strong tier 5. Looking at the way the setup, you might think, oh, it's just a New York clone, but it's really not. It's a superior New York in pretty much every single way. Carrier going for drop again. Let's turn in. The turning circle is slightly in favor of the New York. See, there we have something the New York wins in. I think the New York has a slightly better turning circle, and I think maybe a 1 second better rudder shift. It loses in speed, as I said, so it doesn't win the entire maneuverability battle, but it does have a bit of an advantage in its favor. Oh. Maybe should have waited a bit longer, maybe should have switched to HE here. I'm remaining angled and I'm trying to glide behind the island here. The idea is that Fuso won't have time to shoot me before he glides behind the island, and that seems to have worked out. Since this is actually a very close game, it's a 5 versus 5, and because of all those torps I ate, I'm kind of struggling to stay alive and trying to carry this. The Bogue does pop up. I'm gonna try to punish him. Dispersion though, it does feel like it's going in the favor of the Iron Duke. I will admit I haven't played the New York in a while, but I remember my experience from the New York felt like I was kind of dealing with a shotgun, and I don't have those same issues with the Iron Duke. It feels quite, the guns feel quite reliable in terms of landing where I want them to land. And of course, probably if you miss, then well, your volley misses simply because you were a potato. You can't really blame dispersion the same way. Oh, and there we have another thing I just thought of that the New York does beat it in. The New York has a range of 18 kilometers when fully upgraded, whereas Iron Duke only has 16.8. Of course, thanks to the improved concealment, that's not really that much of an issue, but of course a reduction in range is something that must always be mentioned and considered, especially when facing higher tiers. So New York can shoot from slightly further away, Iron Duke simply can get closer with the stealth, can disengage easier, can burn them if they angle, and can tank the higher tiers better. So, and if you get HE spammed, it's easier to disengage with Iron Duke because it's faster. So yeah, the trade-off isn't exactly beneficial, or the argument isn't exactly that beneficial to the New York, but it does have these very few advantages. Angling towards this Fuso and turning my guns at the same time, because I'm assuming he wants to try to finish me off. But I kill him with my guns without too many issues. And that was the third kill. And now this Bogue that has been kind of bravely pushing in, I assume he's lost all his planes, that's why he's doing this, which isn't necessarily a bad idea, being a distraction and all that, but once his teammates are dead, all he's really contributing to us is some additional points. Now we're facing a Bayern. Now Bayern of course has some very big guns, 380mm guns, those are of course the big thing about it, and it is an especially tanky tier 6 battleship. I've often mentioned that I consider the Bayern probably the tankiest tier 6 battleship in the entire game. It doesn't eat the random pens that the Warspites tends to eat, it's just overall extremely well armored, and bouncing shells left, right and center is not uncommon in that thing. So I think I'm just gonna play it quite safe, and I'm gonna wait for him to pass by this island, and I'm gonna punish him as he comes sailing past the island, because charging out behind the island myself and putting myself into close range of German battleship is probably not the best idea, because while the 380mm guns tend to have questionable dispersion, there's no questioning the power, the penetrative power they have, and of course the alpha damage as well. So that would be, I feel like it would be quite a suicidal move. I'm popping a heal even though I heal the most minimal amount you can imagine, simply because it's a chunk of additional health that can help me in fighting this dude. Oh, my volley, I shoot a bit, maybe a second too early. and I don't actually get the kill on him, but get some one penetration. The Mutsuki fire does finish him off. So it does look like we will be able to turn this into a victory, even though I ended up eating some very unfortunate widespread torps. Of course, just stopping in the middle of the open, like you saw our Dunkirk do, that's rarely the best option. If you stop in a ship that you want to angle in, like something like a Yamato or Dunkirk or whatever, you kind of want to do it near terrain, so you have some terrain covering you, covering your flanks from potential torpedoes, or in general someone shooting you in the flank or whatever. Stopping in the middle of basically where the A cap would be is rarely advisable, because not only is there the chance that he gets torped in the flank like he did, but if he has to retreat, he has no actual cover to retreat behind, so he's just going to be reversing in the very open where everyone can shoot him. And also his flank was entirely exposed, so not just was there the threat of torpedoes from the side, but also the threats of someone just simply shooting him in the very thinly armed Dunkirk side. So overall a questionable play. Regardless though, it did work out, and at 987 points, it looks like we are about to clinch this. I doubt I'll be able to catch this Musuki. He is torping somewhere over there, trying to go for a Fuso, but not gonna have any chance to finish him. Sadly, I didn't get the imaginary Kraken that I could have if I'd finished off the Bayern, but overall 150k damage in a tier 5 when you're up tiered is of course not something to scoff at. Only shot down 3 planes, as I mentioned. AA, not really much to brag about. Looking at the team score, we see we did top the scoreboard, 2.1k, which is pretty nice. Probably would have a couple of achievements in there, but once again, these are test ships, so we don't really get any achievements at all. Looking at the detailed report, well, you can see almost all the damage I took this game was torps. You have a fairly weak torpedo build, 19% I think I said it was, so these low tier torps of course deal a ton of damage to you, and because they're pretty much unrepairable damage, they are a major weakness to you. But even with eating all these torps, we didn't really have too many issues, and the general damage weight otherwise wasn't significant at all. Overall though, 100 shells hit, and the average damage per shell isn't that impressive, but once again 30-second reload makes it less important. Anyway, let me show you my recommended build for this ship. Right, as usual, I will start off with my recommended modules. Note that I'm using my Hood Captain on this guy. The Hood Captain fits these Royal Navy battleships quite well, since you use very much the same perks, or many of the same perks in general. Note that with Concealment Expert, like I have on this guy, you can get your detectability down to 12.5, which is of course even more useful when facing higher tiers, when you are less detectable in general. Module wise, I highly recommend going for the hull upgrade first. It gives you a nice chunk of health, but it also gives you AA and some maneuverability, which is of course always useful since the default rudder shift is pretty damn slow. Once you have the maneuverability, I'd probably upgrade the range from 15.3 to 16.8, which makes life a lot easier, followed of course by the engine upgrade, which is only 1.5 knots, but when you move as slow as these dreadnoughts do, every single knot is helpful. Consumable wise, I recommend premium damage control and premium heal, not many options here. And upgrade wise, priority 1 is of course main armaments mod. Now actually the turret faces are not that squishy for the tier. Once again, they're rounded, angled, and quite well armored for tier 5, so you don't really lose the turrets so often, but you want to be using this module in the future anyway, and it is the single most useful upgrade for the Iron Duke. Actually, out of interest, what's the New York turret faces like? Okay, so New York has better frontal turret faces, but the sides are probably more vulnerable. Let's see, 203, 203, 279. Yeah, you're less likely to get punished in the side, and only the back of the turrets are as vulnerable as the New Yorks. So very good turrets in general. Better dispersion, since I don't see the point of increasing the AA, since as I mentioned, the values are quite sad on the AA. And finally, of course, additional tankiness, since you don't really lose engine or a rudder shift that often, or well, ever pretty much. And now, as I said, I'm using my hood captain, which is a 19 point. Of course, you probably won't have a 19 point captain at your tier 5 unless you slap one of your leveled up captains on it like I did, since I was lazy. Probably priority target. I like it on a lot of these battleships, especially when you're tier 5 and you face higher tiers. Knowing when a nugget or something is aiming at you is quite important, since they can do so much damage to your poor little low tier ship. I would probably go for turret traverse as the first perk, since the turret traverse is quite slow, and actually I think that's something that the New York will come out. Well, New York turret traverse isn't exactly impressive, but with expert marksman, the New York would beat it. Not by much, but slightly faster. So that's something in favor of New York. Yay! Followed by superintendent, additional heal, followed by concealment expert. So that would be the basic 10 pointer. Then for 12 points, go for adrenaline rush. And then you can, as I said, choose between vigilance and fire prevention. I'd like to point out the armor that I spoke of. As I mentioned, that this thing is very, very tanky. If we look at the New York, it doesn't, like, if we remove this torpedo hull, you see that all of this is just 19 millimeters, and hits into this upper part of the broadside is what tends to cause all these massive pens on the New York and cause it so much damage. Of course, the nose on this ship is, there's just a lot of area to overmatch here, and then we compare it to the Iron Duke, and well, of course we can see the difference. There's none of that squishy armor on the sides. It's 152 millimeters here, it's 203 millimeters here. The deck back here is actually 44 millimeters, which makes it invulnerable not just to normal HE but even IFHE spam. Even 203 millimeter HE is gonna struggle with this thing. So, and it's got this here, it's 25 millimeter, which is, once again, that is vulnerable, but it's quite a small area. And of course, the front fore-end armor belt extends all the way almost to the nose. So literally, if someone shoots you in the nose, they kind of have to hit this area here. If you angle even the slightest like this and you manage to get the shells on this part of the belt, you're probably going to be bouncing them, because this amount of armor angled is very, very tanky. So that was kind of what I meant when I said that this ship is simply a much tankier New York when it comes to armor. Worth noting is, of course, we can see the turtle back here. You see how it angles up around our citadel, protects our citadel in the middle, and our citadel is, of course, sitting right at the waterline. If we remove the turtle back, our citadel is sitting right at the waterline, and it's significantly smaller than the New York citadel, which is not just extends further to both the bow and the stern, it also comes up from the waterline. You can see it extends above the waterline quite a bit. So yeah, Iron Duke winning this comparison quite hands down. Exterior wise, what does it have? A premium camo? It does not have a premium camo. Signal wise, of course, I recommend the usual stuff for battleships, which is healing flag, India Delta, India Yankee aka fire extinguishing, and finally faster consumable reload aka November Foxtrot. Anyway, that was my Iron Duke commentary. A ship that is making the New York seem even more shit than it felt before. Hooray for that. Anyway, that was all for me. I hope you enjoyed this commentary. I will talk to you guys later.